Her footsteps echoed across the marble floor like soft thunder in a ballroom coated with gold-plated silence. The chandeliers glittered overhead, catching the whispers that fluttered from table to table. Sharp, amused, condescending. She walked, alone, a young black woman in a pale mint dress that didn't sparkle, didn't scream wealth, only grace. Eyes narrowed, smirks bloomed. The laughter was hushed but intentional, the kind that floats through champagne glasses and hides behind pearls. No one offered her a smile. No one thought she belonged. But she didn't flinch. She didn't glance to the left or right. She moved like she knew exactly where she was meant to be. And when she stopped, when she reached the heart of that room, dripping in old money and cold manners, what she did next didn't just silence the room. It dismantled it. Have you ever watched a room choke on its own arrogance? You're about to. Ariel Brooks was the kind of woman people underestimated at first glance. Just 25, she carried herself with a soft grace that didn't ask for attention, but earned it quietly. Raised by a single mother who scrubbed floors and folded linen in the homes of the wealthy, Ariel had grown up watching elegance from the outside, learning early that true strength didn't come from status, but from silence held with dignity. Now she worked as a community teacher, molding young minds in underfunded classrooms, wearing dresses sewn by hand and shoes that bore more stories than scuffs. Her beauty wasn't loud. It was in the way she walked, the way she listened, the way her presence made a space pause just slightly. Across that same ballroom sat Margaret Langford, poised like a queen at court. In her 70s, draped in cobalt blue and diamonds, older than Ariel, Margaret was the embodiment of old money, charity galas, hushed scandals, and a smile that could cut deeper than any insult. Her cruelty was elegant, always hidden beneath layered compliments and condescending laughter. She didn't shout, she dismissed, and she had perfected the art of doing so without ever seeming impolite. The ballroom itself was a cathedral of opulence. Golden chairs circled ivory-clothed tables. Delicate roses bloomed from crystal vases, and towers of champagne shimmered beneath chandeliers as grand as myths. Waiters glided between guests like ghosts in bow ties, and conversations buzzed with stories of estates, mergers, and legacies. Into this world stepped Ariel, unaccompanied, unannounced. Her invitation had been sent without signature, the name at the top etched in looping silver script. She clutched it gently in her hand as she entered, head high, unaware, or perhaps completely aware that every eye would find her and assume she didn't belong. Whispers began immediately. Who is she? Is she here to serve? A lost intern? Margaret leaned to the woman beside her with a chuckle. They must have left the back door open, she said, tapping her champagne glass. But Ariel didn't falter. She walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had been told she wasn't welcome her whole life, and came anyway. The tension began as a whisper, soft and sharp like the clink of silver against porcelain. A few heads tilted, a few shoulders leaned closer. Laughter danced beneath breath, polite on the surface but laced with venom. Ariel's dress, a pale mint satin that shimmered under the chandelier light, wasn't designer, and that was enough for judgment. "Who let the help in?" someone muttered near the Langford table, their voice hushed but loud enough to be heard by design. Margaret didn't laugh, not audibly, but her raised brow and amused smirk said more than words ever could. A waiter passed by and gently gestured toward the back of the room, motioning to a small, barely decorated table near the service entrance. "Miss, you might be more comfortable over here," he said with a rehearsed kindness. Ariel looked at the table, then at him, then back at the ballroom filled with gold-plated manners and paper-thin grace. But she didn't move. Her hands, calm and unshaken, opened the small clutch hanging by her side. From it, she pulled out a single folded envelope. Ivory, embossed, sealed with silver wax. She stepped forward, slowly but without hesitation, and the heels of her shoes echoed through the silence that began to creep in, as people noticed she wasn't heading toward the back, but toward the front. Her posture remained upright, her expression unreadable. At the center of the grand ballroom, just a few feet from Margaret Langford herself, Ariel stopped and looked directly at the host's table. "Excuse me," she said softly but clearly, lifting the envelope with both hands. "I believe that's my seat." The air stilled. Utensils froze mid-cut. Glasses hovered halfway to lips. Margaret turned, her smile stiffening as she adjusted the brooch on her jacket. The host took the envelope, broke the seal, and read the contents with growing tension in his throat. Then, without meeting anyone's eye, he looked back at Ariel and nodded once. "Yes," he said. "Front row, center seat." Silence swelled like a storm held behind crystal walls, and in that moment, every sneer, every whisper, every assumption bent under the weight of truth. Ariel walked past the very people who had dismissed her seconds ago, her chin lifted not out of arrogance, but peace. She wasn't here to prove anything. She was here because she was meant to be. And suddenly, the room wasn't sure what to do with that. The host, a middle-aged man in a polished tuxedo, approached Ariel with the hesitance of someone realizing a mistake too late. He scanned the invitation again, then glanced toward the table placement chart near the podium, eyes widening in realization. The guests watched in breathless anticipation, their smirks fading as curiosity turned into concern. The host cleared his throat, stepped to the microphone, and adjusted it. With shaky hands, "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice tighter than before, "it's my honor to welcome tonight's keynote speaker and our event's largest silent donor, Miss Ariel Brooks." Gasps fluttered through the room like a wave breaking against fine china. Forks clinked softly against untouched plates. Margaret Langford stiffened in her seat, blinking as if someone had just turned the chandeliers off. Her lips parted slightly, and she turned toward Ariel with an awkward, stammering attempt at decorum. "My dear, I didn't realize," she began, but her voice trailed off beneath the weight of her own embarrassment. Ariel met her eyes, calmly, gently. No venom, just presence. Without a word, Ariel made her way to the stage. She didn't rush. Every step was steady, deliberate, like she had walked this path before, just not in heels or under chandeliers. She stood behind the podium, no papers, no notes. Just her voice and the room that had once judged her. Her eyes swept across the sea of stunned faces, some ashamed, some still confused, and some watching her like they were seeing her for the first time. She took a breath. "You laughed when I walked in," she said softly, but her words cut through the silence like glass. "Across velvet. But you're about to listen while I stand here." No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. The chandeliers above seemed to flicker just slightly, as if bowing to her presence. "I'm not here to shame you," she continued. "That's Not why I accepted this invitation. I'm here because this room, the one you tried to keep me out of, is one I've known my entire life. Just not from this side." She paused, her fingers curled around the edge of the podium, her shoulders relaxed but firm. "My mother used to clean these floors," she said, her voice gentle, proud. "While you danced in ball gowns and passed hors d'oeuvres, I waited in the back kitchen, reading books beneath the sink. I memorized the sound of laughter through closed doors, the hush of judgment as we left through side exits. Ariel, let the words linger. The silence now wasn't awkward, it was reverent. I built something from those memories. A nonprofit that funds education for underprivileged girls in this city. Girls like I used to be. Girls who are told they don't belong in rooms like this. Girls who are watched, whispered about, and placed near service doors because their shine doesn't match your chandeliers." The room was frozen, chairs stiff, champagne untouched. Even Margaret had stopped fidgeting. "I chose to donate anonymously," she continued, "because it was never about recognition. But tonight, someone insisted I attend in person. So I did. And when I walked in, I saw how little had changed." She didn't cry. Her voice didn't shake. She simply stood, radiant in her quiet fire, and held the room with the power of a woman who had been underestimated her entire life and had turned that underestimation into fuel. "So, before we raise another glass," she said, "I want to raise something more important. Perspective. Because dignity doesn't always come wrapped in diamonds. Sometimes it walks in wearing a thrifted dress and carrying the weight of every door ever slammed in its face." As she stepped down from the podium, the applause didn't come instantly. It came in waves, slow, building, real. Not out of obligation, but awe. Margaret sat still, her hands folded, her gaze lowered. And Ariel? She walked back down the same aisle with the same grace she had entered with. But this time, the silence wasn't mocking. It was reverent. The applause slowly faded, but the silence that followed held its own weight, heavier, deeper, and far more honest than the hush that had greeted Ariel when she first walked in. She returned to the microphone, not because she needed to, but because there was still one truth left unsaid. Her voice, steady and soft, rose once more, not to boast, but to finish what had begun the moment she was mocked at the door. "I used to wait in the kitchen of this very hotel," she said, eyes drifting toward the far wall where double doors led into the staff corridor. "While my mother scrubbed toilets and washed floors that people like you never looked down at, I sat on overturned milk crates, doing my homework, listening to the sounds of music and silverware floating through the walls." Her voice didn't break, but it carried something stronger than emotion, memory sharpened by purpose. Some nights she'd finish after midnight and we'd walk home under streetlights because cab fare wasn't for people like us. A few guests looked down. A few others looked away. But Ariel wasn't finished. "For years I donated anonymously to this very charity," she said. "I helped keep the lights on, fund the scholarships, build what this event is celebrating tonight. Not for credit, not for applause, but because I believed in what this could be." She let her eyes travel across the room, finally landing on Margaret Langford, who sat frozen. Her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and dawning clarity. "But tonight," Ariel continued, "I was asked to attend in person. Come accepted formally," they said. "So here I am." She stepped down from the podium and took a few strides toward the front row, stopping just beside Margaret's table. Her presence was calm, almost gentle, but her truth cut cleaner than any insult ever could. "Your maid's daughter," she said, looking Margaret directly in the eye, "is the one keeping this place afloat." Gasps rippled again, quieter, this time, but charged. Margaret blinked slowly, her posture shrinking inch by inch as the weight of recognition settled in. Ariel stood poised, not in spite of the judgment, but because of it. And then came the twist that no one in that gilded room saw coming. "I also happen to be a majority shareholder in the Langford Hotel Group," Ariel said evenly. "Acquired it 2 years ago. Quietly, discreetly, the same way I've moved through most rooms in my life, including this one." Now, the silence was absolute. I watched as my mother was dismissed, overlooked, spoken about as if her presence was a blemish. And now, the same people who once called her the help sit under a chandelier her daughter now owns. Ariel didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice, but every word landed like a storm without thunder, silent but undeniable. She looked once more at Margaret, then at the room, then offered the smallest nod of gratitude. "My mother taught me how to walk into rooms they said I'd never enter, but she never told me I'd one day own them." And with that, she turned and walked back to her seat. Not a single person dared to speak. Not yet. Because in that moment, everyone there was no longer just a guest at a gala. They were a witness to truth, to legacy, to the quiet power of a woman who had turned judgment into a crown and history into justice. As Ariel took her seat again, a hush hung over the ballroom, heavier than the crystal chandeliers above. Margaret Langford, once, the picture of arrogance wrapped in silk, now sat motionless. Her eyes had fallen to the edge of the table, hands loosely clasped in her lap, her usual air of superiority dissolved into quiet reckoning. Around her, the crowd followed suit. No more laughter, no more murmurs, no more sideways glances. The only sound was the soft clinking of someone setting their untouched fork down with the slow, deliberate care of someone suddenly unsure of everything they thought they knew. Ariel didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply finished her wine, folded her napkin neatly, and stood when the final applause was called. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. This time, as she walked down the aisle that had earlier bristled with contempt, no one rolled their eyes. No one whispered. Instead, they looked down, humbled, and for those who did meet her gaze, it wasn't with pity or curiosity, but respect. After the event, one by one, people began to approach her. A young woman in a beaded dress said softly, "Thank you for saying what so many of us never could." A silver-haired man, clearly someone used to being heard, not listening, extended his hand and said nothing, only nodding with sincerity. Even the host returned, this time without the rehearsed smile, offering a quiet apology and a simple, "You changed more than the room tonight. You changed perspective." Ariel accepted each word with grace, not pride. Her power didn't come from the applause. It came from having told the truth, finally, in the same space where that truth was once erased. When she returned to her small dressing suite in the back, one assigned to her only after they learned who she was, she found something unexpected in her clutch. A folded piece of lined paper, aged and soft at the corners. Her breath caught when she saw the handwriting. It was her mother's. A note she had never known existed. likely slipped into her belongings by someone who had kept it for years. She unfolded it carefully, hands trembling just slightly, and read, "My sweet Ariel, I don't know where life will take you, but I pray it's somewhere better than where I've been allowed to stand. One day, you'll walk into rooms they said you'd never enter. And when you do, walk tall, not to prove them wrong, but to prove that grace survives anything. Love always, Mom." Tears welled in Ariel's eyes, but none fell. She held the note against her chest, breathing in the weight and the warmth of a legacy that was finally no longer invisible. Her mother had scrubbed the floors of that hotel, but tonight her daughter had stood on its stage, unapologetic, unshaken, and unforgettable. Justice, for Ariel, hadn't come with fury. It had come with stillness, with truth, with the quiet echo of dignity rising higher than any chandelier. And in that truth, something shifted, not just in the room, but in the people who filled it. She had not just entered that space, she had transformed it. Sometimes the most powerful shifts in a room don't come with shouts or slammed doors. They arrive softly, on steady footsteps, in the silence between stairs, in the gaze of someone who has carried generations of judgment and still chooses to walk tall. Ariel never raised her voice. She didn't retaliate or humiliate. She simply told the truth, stood her ground, and let the weight of her dignity do what 1,000 words never could. And in doing so, she reminded a room full of polished pride that sometimes the loudest speeches are delivered in silence, and sometimes dignity doesn't raise its voice. It simply walks through the door. Have you ever judged someone too soon? Or been the one they misjudged? Have you ever seen someone break every assumption with nothing more than presence and grace? If Ariel's story moved you, share it. Let it echo. Let it remind the world that strength doesn't always wear gold or shout for attention. Sometimes it wears a quiet smile and rewrites the rules without asking permission. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story, where quiet grace conquers the loudest hate.